Welcome to the Life's Best Medicine podcast, where we are finding hope and healing one episode at a time. No appointment needed, no rubber gloves, and no coping. Just a healthy dose of life lessons to help equip you for this wild journey we call life. This episode of Life's Best Medicine is brought to you by the great people at Simply Snackin'. 10 flavors of beef and chicken, humanely raised, grass-fed beef, free-range chicken. And I'm excited about the 10 flavors because I'm heading off to the jungles of Guatemala on a medical trip, and I can have a new flavor every day and not get bored. I'm going to pack them in my suitcase because they're light and easy, and I could bust them out whenever I need to. So if I get stuck somewhere and everyone's eating terrible food, I could have some healthy, great snacks and still stick to my low carb lifestyle. So thank you, Simply Snackin', for again sponsoring this episode and for bringing these important stories to the people. Thank you very much. Hello and welcome back to the Life's Best Medicine podcast. This is one I was excited about for a long time. This is a cool person, smart person. Someone when I think of success, this is what I think about of someone who actually not about having tons of money and having prestige and all that stuff. It's about life and being content and not being content and being pushed forward and living life. So Cynthia Thurlow, thank you. Excuse me. Thank you so much for joining me today and joining us. And I know your story is great and you're having a huge impact on people. I see you as a positive force. And so tell people like really how you get, in a nutshell, the health part of it, but then the life part about it.
Yeah, thank you for that kind introduction. I've really been looking forward to connecting with you. Well, my title is I'm trained as a Western medicine nurse practitioner, and I'm married. I have 2 boys. In fact, I'm the only female in my house. That includes all the animals, the menagerie of animals that we have. I talk a lot about the doodles and a lizard and a few other things that we have in this menagerie. But a lot of what my life's focus, life work is on helping educate people about how important nutrition is. And that wasn't part of my original training. And so a lot of my pivot that I took almost 5 years ago, which is hard to wrap my head around when I left clinical medicine and became an entrepreneur, has really been focused on saying it all starts with food. And so educating men and women and families about the importance of the type of nutrition that we have, and that can look very different for each one of us. But I tend to be pro animal protein. I tend to be pro vegetable, and I tend to cycle my carbs, but I recognize that doesn't necessarily work for everyone. And I'm a huge believer in the power of our minds. And so mindset work and meditation and gratitude and exercise and, being active with my family and traveling when it's not during a pandemic are all huge priorities for us. And I think that if nothing else, this past year has really shown us what we're made of. You either rose to the occasion or you kind of got bogged down on what was happening. And so for me, like we were talking about a few minutes ago, a lot of this past year has been about seizing opportunities and looking at the world with the glass half full, because there's really no other way to be. There's no other way for me to be, is what I should say.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think this year made us reassess our values and what's important and what matters. And what I saw was a lot of negativity. Like Twitter, I saw it. I saw just conflict and fighting. And I'm thinking, is this what we are? At some point, I always see you posting positive, showing a picture. Hey, it's okay to love your family and your husband, right? I think we went through I think we grew up in the same era a little bit. I'm older, but, married with children where the dad was a jerk and the family, and like when you see it, like it became a custom for the family to fall apart.
Yeah.
And so for those of us with stronger family values, some people find it offensive. I found that when I talked about hope or faith or love, I got attacked on Twitter like things are never going to get better. And I was surprised by that. And that kind of instigated me to say, gosh, can we not have a dialogue and say, okay, you're Muslim, I'm Christian. Can we be friends? Can we love each other still? Can we have different views? Or can you be vegan and I'm a carnivore? Can we be friends? Do we have to fight? Is that part of it? And I think we've lost this dialogue where we can say, oh, we can agree to disagree. I see what you're coming from, but I don't agree. That's okay, right?
Well, I think it's this mutual respect. I know that my first iteration with an undergraduate degree, I was a poli-sci major. And so this was in a time when there was a lot of bipartisanship within our government. And there were vigorous debates, but we always went back to being respectful. And you can agree to disagree, or you can have a passionate discussion about a topic that several people feel differently on. But I don't know if it's the advent of social media that people feel like keyboard warriors and they can sit behind their computers and they feel a degree of power over other individuals. You know, my mom many years ago taught me, if you have nothing nice to say nothing at all. And that's kind of my guiding principle, that there's very little I'm going to die on the sword on social media. You know, to me, it's like, I'd rather just say, you know what, I don't agree with you. Now we get to a degrees of now I'm not going to block you. I'm going to politely disagree, down to some people just need to be blocked immediately because there's just so much negativity that goes along with it. But I have an avatar in my head. So every time I get a really particularly belligerent, nasty person, his name is Fred, and Fred lives in his parents' basement, and Fred is addicted to processed food and lives in the dark. And so I think about Fred. Of course, Fred is probably a real person somewhere, but the point being that I think part of being part of a society is that you have opportunities to disagree, and that's part of, I would train much like you, big academic center. We vigorously debated a lot of things, but we always walked away from the table saying, okay, well, I don't necessarily agree, or maybe you've changed my mind. Maybe you've clarified something that I misunderstood, and now I'm going to look at this differently. But the thought process of being so decisive and so polarizing, we just went through a pretty nasty election here in the United States. And so without getting political, I would just say that I saw some of the worst in people over the past, 6 to 12 months. And I find that very troubling. And much to your point about whatever social media platform you're on, how many people I've had to mute, block, because they're just so negative. And I just, as I go about my day, all of us have busy, active lives. But as I go about my day, it's like, I just don't want to be exposed to that on a reoccurring basis. And I think it's really important and healthy to have those boundaries, whatever those boundaries are, because they may be very different for different people. For me, I'd rather get outside and take a walk in nature like I did right before I jumped on with you, because for me, that has been one of the gifts of 2020, was that I had this reconnection with, obviously I have dogs, so they get walked every day, but getting out in nature every single day without sunglasses. And that just brings me so much happiness. And it's something so incredibly simple. But for me, it really is a way that I start my day, and it starts my day on the right foot, literally. And, my dogs are happy and they come in and they're tired and they don't bark as much. So it allows me to get my work done. But yeah, it's definitely a balance for sure.
Yeah, I think that's important. As a doc, one thing I noticed, I would talk to people and I say, where's your happy place? Where do you find peace? For some people, it's church. Some people, it's in the mountains. Some people, it's at the beach. Some people, it's surfing. So I think it's really important for people. That's part of our health. That's why on the low carb MD, we're focused more on the nutrition part. But I was like, you can have a perfect diet, but be miserable in life. I see people that are stressed and tense, and now that I have continuous glucose monitors on patients, I see it. You have a major stress day, sugar spike, all the stress hormones, all this stuff happens. So to think that you just eat the right diet and everything's perfect, like there's a lot more to the picture. And I think that's what I've loved about you, is you're looking at, and her podcast is called Everyday Wellness. And that's what you're looking at, is like, how do we be well in relationship and all these different things, not just what we eat, because,
Yeah.
you know, it's amazing to me, especially like what you're talking about politically with the divide. I always made the joke. It's like, man, I used to think politics and religion were dangerous, but you talk nutrition and people get nasty. And it's like, at the end of the day, does it really matter if you're vegan and I'm carnivore? We cannot be friends with all the other things that we talk about in life? And I think what I'm getting at is, a lot of times we divide ourselves based on our differences rather than unite on what we agree on.
That's such a good point, because whether you're vegan or carnivore or paleo or keto, et cetera, you care about food, right? That's really what you're saying, is you're choosing to identify with a group that has a particular methodology or perspective on nutrition. And so, I have great respect for people when they want to say, hey, why did you go carnivore for a period of time? Or, what are your feelings about this particular, mindset? And so the curious thing about the CGMs, which I think continuous glucose monitors to me are one of the most powerful, not only biohacks, but information devices. And even if you were just to do it for 2 or 3 weeks or a month, incredibly insightful. And so here I am, I sit here on my very pro animal protein. I've finally been able to tolerate vegetables again, for which I'm very happy. And I had one day when I was wearing my CGM, I just got my new one. So I had a couple days of a lag, very stressful day. I couldn't believe the impact it made on my blood sugars. And I'm someone that's at a healthy weight. I sleep well, I meditate, I do all the things. I don't eat a lot of processed food. And I was stunned. In fact, my blood sugar went so high, I actually reached out to my contact person at NutriSense and said, what in the heck just happened? Is it because of what I ate for lunch? Or is this just a stress response throughout the day? And it stayed elevated for probably a whole day. And I was very, very surprised. So if you're ever considering doing one, I do find it to be a really, really valuable identifier, but it also is the impact of, sleep on our blood sugar is also a surprise. You have a night of really crappy sleep and you think, oh, it's not that bad, I'll sleep the following night, and your blood sugars are dysregulated and you don't make good food choices. And so another super valuable, and much more valuable to me than just someone checking with a glucometer where you literally prick your finger a few times a day. And most of these, continuous glucose monitors, you can talk to your healthcare provider and you can actually get a script. So even like I mentioned, 2 to 4 weeks can be super valuable. But yeah,
it changed me. I'm telling you, when I wore that, I knew a lot more. I know a lot because I know how my body responds. So I know, I might say, well, I'm kind of hungry. My sugar's 90. I don't really need to eat it. My sugar's 90. I'm not low sugar. And so all those things that people, and plus I think when people see it, I see it like their sugars are crazy up and down, and low sugars and high sugars. And when you get low sugars, it's stressful. So people are stressed and tense, and they turn to food because they're stressed, and then they eat again. Then you turn yourself into a total disaster,
Yeah.
a hostage really. And
Yeah.
so people, when they're wearing them, they realize, oh, you know what? Like I have a guy, he had some corn. I have a piece of corn, and my sugar went to 300, right? And it was 100
Wow.
before. So things like that you don't realize, or a little juice or a mimosa, whatever, and they realize, and they go, okay, I'm not doing that. They do it. I don't have to tell them. So it's great because they'll come to me and go, did you see my spike that day? Because I did this thing. So, or I was stressed, or I had to give this meeting at work. And to transition a little bit, you're big into intermittent fasting.
Mhm.
And I know you got to interview Jason Fung, and I think it's so great when people are like-minded and we see the benefits. And I'm looking at the data and I'm shocked by the benefits. But also from a spiritual standpoint, a lot of people in the church want to fast, but it's like penance because they're eating high carb, terrible food. Then they go, okay, I'm not going to eat tomorrow. Good luck. It's very, very, you have to get ready
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah.
So I love that your approach of saying, hey, look, let's how we ease into it. Here's how we ease out of it. Here's having balance in life. And I think that's so important that we've lost.
Yeah. And I think it's really critical. I mean, with all new endeavors, health challenges or healthy choices that we're making in the new year, I like to remind people that slow and steady wins. I used to tell that to my patients in cardiology, slow and steady wins. But I also think we have to give ourselves some grace. I think so many of us really try to force things on ourselves. You mentioned, someone says, I've been eating, 300 or 400 grams of carbs a day, and I'm going to try to do a 24-hour fast. Well, you're setting yourself up for failure in many ways, and you have to kind of have this graduated approach. And that's usually the approach I take with my clients, that we don't go from running for 5 minutes to running a marathon. Like, we have to kind of do this slowly and steadily. And I think one of the things that's really, really valuable that I've learned throughout my trajectory over the last 40 plus years is that we need different things at different points in our lives. And so I'm very open about the fact, when I had my healthcare hiccup 2 years ago, I'm so happy to say it's almost been 2 years. I came out of the hospital and I couldn't eat anything other than meat for probably 9 months. And I
Yeah,
was
tell
very,
people that don't know what happened, like how you end up in the hospital and all that kind of stuff. Because, when I saw you go, oh, look, she's thin and fit, and look at her, she's got it all. You know what I mean? You kind of have that attitude, it's like, what does she know about this stuff? But when you go through stuff, you realize it,
yeah, oh, totally. Well, I think it probably got set up that my husband and I had been in Morocco and Spain to celebrate our 15th wedding anniversary about 4 months before I got sick. And I got horrendous food poisoning. In fact, for anyone who's listening that's a medical person, I thought I had a Mallory Weiss tear because I was vomiting so violently all night. And I was like, here I am, I'm in this beautiful location. I just flew in from Morocco. I'm in Spain. I'm going to see all these beautiful things in the southern part of Spain. And I mean, I spent 2 days, just sick as stink. And then I got food poisoning again, ironically, when I went to do my first TED Talk in Toronto. And so the thought process is that I probably introduced some bacteria into my body that might have set into motion, ultimately having a ruptured appendix and a slew of complications. I spent 13 days in the hospital, had never been sick a day in my life. I had pancolitis, so the entire length of my colon was inflamed. They wanted to initially take me to surgery immediately, and I begged them not to because they would have left me with a colostomy. They would have had to resect my colon, and I was desperate to not lose my colon or even part of it. And then it turned into more complications. And so I was very sick. I was septic, and it just goes to show you that life throws us challenges. And I think probably 5 or 6 days in, I was very depressed. I was cognizant of that, very depressed. And I felt, we talk about faith, very openly. I definitely felt a presence and giving me an option. It's like, this can go one of two ways. What do you want to do? And so I said, I choose to live, and I'm going to fight. And if I'm going to choose to live and fight, I'm going to make sure every day that I'm on this planet, I am living fully and intentionally. And so got out 13 days later, thought I was going to be going to my next big talk with I had a fistula, communication between my appendix and the lower part of my intestine, lower part of my colon. And so I thought I was going to be doing this second TED Talk with a bag hanging down from my abdomen, which thankfully it came out. The fistula resolved a couple days before. But I think when you go through something like that, life-threatening, as not only as a clinician, but a human being, if it doesn't change you for the better, then you've missed the message. And so I spent a good part of 2019 kind of recovering and trying to find a nutritional plan that didn't upset my delicate digestive tract. And so almost 2 years later, it took me to actually be able to eat vegetables. So I talked very openly on Twitter in particular about what my diet was like. And, I got hate from people who, didn't understand why I didn't like vegetables. I said, it's not that I don't like them, they don't like me. And then, we get hate from other people saying, well, you're not real carnivore if you don't eat,
Yeah, we get so militant, and we figure out that, hey, does that work for you? I asked Sean Baker that. I go, hey, Sean, why don't you eat fruit? He said, because I get fat when I eat fruit and my sugars go up. Oh, okay. Why don't you eat vegetables? He goes, I don't like them, and I never liked them. I'm like, okay. That's good enough answer for me. I'm not going to argue with you, but it's that some people have sensitivity to certain foods. Some people, if you get messed up stomach every time you eat jalapenos, you stop eating jalapenos, and who cares if they don't eat jalapenos, right? It's what works for you. And I think that's one thing, as a low carb MD, a lot of people say, well, you're low. Well, guess what? I have vegan friends who are doing great. I've got carnivore friends who are doing great. And I have people, but what they all do is cut out the processed bad stuff, So I think, you fall to the spectrum that works for you, and that's cool if it's working. I have a vegan who eats way more carbs than I could ever imagine. He's 27 years old, fit. I put a continuous glucose monitor. Look, everything's normal. Everything's good. Even though he has these cute, crazy fluctuations, but he's 27 years old, all muscle. So guess what? All that carbs is going to his muscle. He's burning off. But an accountant sitting at his desk all day and he's 300 pounds and he's diabetic, good luck. You're going to be in the hospital with that kind of diet. So it's really individualizing for that person. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's constantly evolving. Here's the one insight. Here's my 2021 insight already that, I've been low carb and carb cycling this entire time. And what I found from my CGM was that my body needs more fat, less protein, and I have to be really careful with my carbs because on my high carb days, I would have like plantains, or I would have sweet potato, or I'd have squash. And there was one day where I had a little bit of rice because my functional medicine person was like, why don't you try rice again? I don't normally eat grains. My blood sugar hit like 153. And I said, those don't work for me. And I didn't even have much. I maybe had a quarter of a cup. And so I think that, we have to give ourselves permission that, whatever we're choosing to do nutrition wise can evolve, shift, and change throughout our lifetime. And so I'm continuing to tinker things. I would say I'm probably more ketogenic now than I ever had been before. And so it's always really valuable, like much to your point about the lean 27-year-old who can handle more carbs. And I always say that's great. And then you have other individuals who can. It's like recognizing that bio-individuality piece is so critical. And
exactly. Yeah. And what works for you. It's like, look, if you're not giving up certain foods, I'm never giving up bread. Okay. How do we work around that? How do we get you the healthiest you can be? And at some point, a lot of people say, okay, like the funniest thing to me is most people come to me, they go, look, I know you know Jason Fung, I know you know Cynthia Thurlow. I'm not fasting. Okay, don't have to fast. Then a week later, they're like, oh, I didn't eat yesterday. I wasn't hungry. Like, because at first they can't imagine not being hungry every 2 hours. Why? Now they can. Now they're a better machine. They're fat adapted. They can run their fat stores. Then you have, some of these long distance runners, like Zach Bitter, who can run 100 miles fasted. I mean, if he can do that, then you could probably get through your accounting day
Yeah,
fasted, right? So I think
exactly.
there's a lot of that, and I think the continuous glucose monitor also helps in that, because you can look at it when you're fasting and see your sugars don't drop. Usually they go up, in my experience,
Hmm.
so if they're fat adapted. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think we're learning a lot. I think that's what's exciting. We're on the cutting edge of learning how to manage that patience, and I think for us who've dedicated our lives to helping other people, that's exciting because we're seeing benefits. And I don't know if you're aware, but I was just reading that the number one suicide risk is a doctor
I saw that. That
of
was
all the
very,
professions. I was surprised because it always was the dentist, but we're beating them now because, I think we want to help people. That's our calling, and then we get there and we're just part of the machine. You know how it is. We both
oh,
got out of that model, and I'm so happy I did.
yeah.
So I think for you, one thing I really want to just step back to is when you felt this presence and this peace going through hell, basically going through the worst time. Tell me a little bit about that. Like, how did that? Was there, you were hopeless and depressed, and all of a sudden you feel something, or was it just in your mind? You knew. What was that like?
When I was in the hospital, is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting. So I knew when I went to the hospital that I was sick. I mean, and I remember saying to my husband, because initially they didn't take me very seriously, and this happens. I'm a pretty healthy looking person. My blood pressure I wasn't running a fever. I wasn't febrile. My pulse rate was pretty low. My blood pressure wasn't too, which was high. It was high for me. It was probably like 120/80, which is high for me. I remember saying to my husband, because I was in so much pain, I couldn't get comfortable. And for anyone listening who's ever had labor, it was worse than labor pain, to give you some idea. And I told him, I said, I had this impending sense of doom. I said, if they don't figure out what's going on with me, I'm going to die. And he was like, what? He's thinking maybe I've got indigestion. I'm like, oh, this isn't indigestion. And so, once I had the validation that I was legitimately sick, I remember my cousin, who's an OBGYN, called me and said, do you need me? And I said, yes. And she said, oh gosh, I knew when you said, makes me emotional to think about it. She said, I knew when you said yes, I knew that you were sick. And so she came down, she was running for Senate in New Jersey, came down to be at my bedside because she knew my husband needed to be home with my kids. And I didn't want them in the hospital because it was stressing them out. And there was definitely a point in time where I was probably 5 days in and I'd lost so much weight. I lost 15 pounds in the first like 5 days because my body was catabolizing all this muscle to try to keep me alive because I was just so sick. And I remember they wanted to give me TPN. For anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's a bag of junk. It's a bag of nutrition that's full of junk. And so in my mind, if you can imagine, as sick as I was, I said to my cousin, they're going to give me soy. Do you think they have organic TPN? And she was like, Cynthia, if you don't let them feed you, you're going to die. You realize that? Like, you're not even thinking clearly. And I remember she left for a little while to give me some privacy. And it was a snowy day. So it was February here in Washington, D.C. And I'm looking outside and I just felt in that moment that, God, the Holy Spirit, the universe was really giving me an opportunity to step up. And so stop feeling sorry for yourself. You know that there are people who've had it far worse than you. I mean, you just have an NG tube. Yes, you have a central line, unless you're hooked up to 100 machines, but you're going to get through this if you choose to get through this. And so it was that point that I decided to just truly, truly surrender. And it was the surrender that was so profoundly moving for me because here I am, I'm totally type A. I'm a go, 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 go kind of person, highly intrinsically motivated, very high achieving person. And I had to surrender. Like I had to finally just let go, let people take care of me and surrender to whatever path things were going to be on. And I had an incredible team. I'm so very grateful that I had this incredible dynamic, I had a slew of specialists, far more than I could have ever wanted. But I had the love of my family and I had a lot of my healthcare provider friends that were coming to visit as much as they could. And so I felt the love and I recognized that I was given this tremendous opportunity, but I had to surrender. And surrendering when you're a type A person and like to be in control and you're a clinician is a very hard thing to do. But when I surrendered, that was when things started to turn around. But yeah, it was like every I had abscesses in my peritoneum. They had to call in interventional radiology in the middle of the night to put drains in. I mean, it was all sorts of crazy things that happened, but I'm so grateful for those experiences because it's made me a stronger person on so many levels. And one of the things I promised myself when I was in the hospital was two things. First, I was going to get well enough to get home to my family because my kids needed me. And two, I was still going to do this talk. And it was more because I wanted to make sure my brain still worked. And I know that sounds silly, but for someone that is an intellectual, cerebral person, I think one of my greatest fears was, what if my brain doesn't work right when I get out of here? Because I think we as clinicians know, how many times have we seen patients go through a long hospitalization or go through sepsis or have a health hiccup and they all of a sudden just cognitively aren't the same. And so that was a huge concern of mine. But yeah, that surrender piece was a big part of 2020. Kind of recognizing that sometimes in life things don't work the way that we want them to, and we have to just kind of roll with it. We have to. In 2019, 2020, 2021, this must be like the 3 years of this lesson I need to keep kind of learning and relearning.
Well, I love it. I love it because it's so important that, life, it's funny because I always see, like my daughter, she goes, okay, I'm going to do this for 3 years, then I'm going to get married, then I'm going to have 3 kids, and then this is going to happen. And then I go, yeah, okay, good luck. Because COVID happens or something happens. And I think right now, a lot of people are like you lying in the bed, reassessing, going, oh my gosh, my job is gone, or my financial freedom's gone, or I can't go out to dinner and that's my thing, or whatever it is. And I think sometimes we reassess. And I think the happiest people I see are the ones who laid that, like for you to be able to say, okay, I'm going to give up control. Let me, for me, the scariest thing is to be on the back of a motorcycle, not driving the motorcycle, because I have control of it. It's scary to have someone else, your life is in someone else's hands. And I think, faith wise, that's a hard thing for people to conceptualize, because they're like, then you're weak. You can't do it on your own. It's like, well, when I do it on my own, I can turn into a train wreck. And if I listen to someone else who might be a little bit smarter than me, or say, hey, like this podcast, for 2 years, I was disobedient because I said, I'm not doing it. I don't have the money. I don't have the time. But the message has to be heard, because right now your message is going to help that person lying in the hospital bed. One of my guests that I had on already was Jimmy Akers, really positive, good guy. And, he said, your podcast saved my life, because I was laying in the hospital with sugars of 600 and they're giving me sugar all the time. And inherently I knew it was wrong, because I started listening to your podcast and I learned. And now he's off all of his meds and he's doing great. And he's got a life and he's reaching people. And it's the same thing with you. You listen and say, okay, let me change what I'm doing. Because if you're on the bottom, Peter Ballerstedt, I just had the pleasure of interviewing. He says, you don't hit the bottom until you stop digging.
Yeah.
Right. At some point, you got to stop digging and you got to start going the other way. And I think for a lot of us, especially in medicine, is that we want to know it all. And we're afraid to say, I was wrong about that. Because my job and your job is to get new data and go, maybe fasting is a problem. Maybe it's not a problem. So then we have to reassess and look at our life and assess it and then go forward. And so for me, faith has never led me down the wrong path where I say, well, that screwed up everything by listening, So I think, and the impact you've had since that moment of being able to give up, and then you get powerful in that.
Well, I feel like in many ways, the universe gives and takes a little bit. And it's, if we're smart, we pay attention to the lessons that we're learning. I mean, I like to think about the fact that my whole intention of doing that second TED Talk was I wanted to share a powerful message. I didn't think anything more about it. I'm an introvert. I can tell you right now, I was so deconditioned and skinny. I mean, I look at that and I normally carry a lot more muscle on my body. And so when I look at that talk, I kind of cringe. I can't really look at it because it brings me back to the fact that my brain hadn't caught up with how sick my body had been. So that was the only way that actually happened, because that was only 27 days after I was discharged. And I actually went to South Carolina with a ruptured appendix and had it taken out 10 days later. So for me, it's very powerful, because it just goes to show you, when you go with like this genuine intention of sharing a good message, the opportunities that come from that can be pretty powerful. And so my life obviously has changed forever. 2019 changed everything for me on so many levels, validated why I left clinical medicine 5 years ago, and kind of started on a different path, but also shows us how powerful communication can be. There's social media can be good on so many levels. You can share valuable information, insights, your podcast, my podcast, lots of great podcasts. You can interact with incredible human beings and genuinely interact with them and not their staff online. As I've come to find out, sometimes when I'm communicating with other people on other platforms, I'm like, is that their staff member, like their VA? I'm not sure it's that person. When you interact with me on social media, it is genuinely me. I still manage to do that. But I think it's really important for people to understand that you can have something happen in your life that's negative, bounce back, be stronger for it, and be able to demonstrate for your children that, hiccups happen. I now refer to it affectionately as the hiccup. Hiccups happen, and we can be stronger for it, which I think is a powerful message, because life doesn't always work out the way that we want it to, ideally. But then later on, we realize, oh, that I had to go through that in order to get to this next. It's like connecting the dots as you look back on your life. Like, oh, now it's clear why that happened. It wouldn't have happened otherwise. And I think that distinction and that realization is one that brings great joy to my life. I was telling my kids I trained in Baltimore, and I have wonderful memories of Baltimore. And my husband grew up in Maryland, and so we normally around the holidays go to Baltimore because we're not that far away, because there's a lot of fun things that we can do there that are unique. And so obviously this year we didn't get to do that, but I was just watching, there's a series called The Wire. Have you ever seen it?
No.
Okay, it's one of the best series I've ever watched in my entire life. And I think I also love it because it's so real and it's so Baltimore. And I was kind of reminiscing about what my life was like when that series started, which I didn't watch it at the time because in our training, none of us have time to watch TV, let's be honest. But thinking back to like what was going on in my life when I lived in Baltimore while this is being filmed, and you just realize you're like, it's really humbling how your life can evolve over 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. And how even if right now your life isn't the way you want it to be, you can put in motion and manifest great things. So if anyone's feeling like they're really struggling, or things that aren't going the way they want them to, just acknowledge that can be a temporary, destination. And maybe there's a lesson in what you're going through that's going to allow you to grow in ways you didn't even realize you were capable of. I mean, that's kind of how I process. I still, even talking to my therapist, I still try to process all the things that have happened over the last 2 years. But, the one realization I have is that I wouldn't be where I am if I hadn't gone through what I did before. And so
You
it's
know,
all good.
that's critical, right? That's something where people say, well, if God's good, why do bad things happen? Because you grow from that, you learn. Good things come out of bad things sometimes, through this. My wife even says, she says, our family's even closer during this because we spend more time together. We talk more, we reflect on what's important, and try to turn the news off and all the bad stuff. Because for me, like people say, where's your place of peace? My home is my place of peace. As a matter of fact, well, I don't want to go too much into it, but my old work, I was working 14-hour days, and I wasn't the best person I could be because I was stressed and tense, and someone's 2 minutes late, and I'm upset because I know everyone else, and I know I'm not going to get home till late, and it's being on the treadmill that's too fast, and I knew it, and I said, well, I got to make a living. And then one day I go, this isn't worth it anymore, right? Knowing what I know, I'm a hypocrite if I'm sleeping 5 hours a night, and I'm stressed all the time and tense, and I know the effects physiologically. I said, it's going to shorten my life. So is it worth it where I kill myself trying to make a buck and try to help everyone else and kill myself? And as well as I do, healthcare workers are some of the sickest people on earth because we're dedicated to helping everyone else. So I won't work out because I'll spend an hour helping that person. And I think a lot of, as a lot of the people who are morbidly obese, diabetic, out of control, they're caregivers because they care for everyone, but they don't care for themselves.
Yeah. And I think that's really critical. And nurses in particular, do a terrible job with this. They self-medicate with food and all sorts of other substances. And for me, recently I've gotten a lot of questions about, why I left clinical medicine, which was obviously a really hard decision for me. But I was working in cardiology, and my background prior to that was ER medicine. So I'm a bit of an adrenaline junkie. I like sick patients. I like puzzles. I like figuring things out. And I am a very, very good nurse practitioner. And one of the brightest physicians I've ever worked with, his name is Dr. Jeff Louie, one of my favorite human beings. He and his wife are lovely friends of ours. And he said to me, when you take your ego out of this decision, it will be easy. And I'll never forget when he said that to me. It still gives me chills when I think about it. But 2 months later, after we had this discussion, because we always had these deep discussions in between, talking about patients and working together. 2 months later, I woke up one morning and I said to my husband, I'm done. And my husband's an engineer. Let me be very clear. My husband's an engineer, he's very fiscally conservative. So the thought of me walking away from a well-paying job, a regular well-paying job, terrified him. And I said, I don't doubt that I will replace that income and make more. And I'm not at all worried. Of course, he was terrified. And I left clinical medicine. I cried every day I was at work. The last 2 weeks I worked because I loved my patients and I loved the staff I work with, and most of the other, healthcare providers I work with. I just love them. They were good friends. They were family. But I couldn't function anymore in a model that I felt was so obscenely broken. And I got tired of writing prescriptions because that is what cardiology has been reduced to in many ways. And I didn't have the time to spend with patients talking to them about food and sleep and stress management because I got this little teeny tiny block of time, probably a little bigger than yours, but still teeny tiny. And it was like hospital discharge, they're a train wreck, and oh, I need to talk about all these other things. You couldn't do it. And so it was very, very validating when I got to a point in my business when I was like, wow, okay, much to your point, finding this work-life balance. And so for me, like I never would have been able to walk outdoors with a dog or two dogs and my husband in the middle of the day before. And yet the things that bring me joy now are so much more simple and yet so much more enjoyable. And darn it, when we can start traveling again, that will be a huge part of what we do because that's what we love to do as a family. But this time together over this past, 10 months has been a gift. And I think that we're all stronger for it. I think that, we get to a point where you either realize you really love your family or you really don't. I have some friends, close friends that have had to make some difficult decisions in relationships, and that's very sad, but it's what's best for them and their families. I have other friends who said, gosh, it's been easy to be quote unquote stuck at home with my family because I love my family. And, I have two teenage boys. So you can imagine two teenage boys who are somehow doing well, doing well in school, doing well emotionally, doing far too much electronics, but heck, we're not able to do as many things as we do. But, we play games and we do puzzles and, we do movie series together and we cook a lot and teenage boys eat a lot of food. So I guess the point of what I'm saying is, recognizing that, you may have everything you need right in front of you and you just don't realize it. And so, 2020 was very affirming of that. And, my husband and I, despite not being able to do some of the things we normally did, to connect together, making a bigger effort to connect, making a bigger effort to spend time together. That's why taking a walk with him for an hour every day is such a luxury because we get to actually talk about our day. Because when you're on a walk with someone, you're not listening to a podcast, you're not distracted, you're not listening to a book, you're communicating, and that can be so valuable. And then we're usually making fun of our dogs as we walk and maybe making other comments. We in a very quick turnaround decided to sell our house. So we live in a suburb of Washington, D.C., and we don't really love living in Washington, D.C., and it has nothing to do with what's been going on. I'm just as a generalization. And we literally in 3 weeks packed up a 5,000 square foot home, sold it, got it under contract in one day, and are in a rental right now in the same area, building outside the area. And so we're really excited to be moving to a place that's a little slower pace, closer to the water. I kept saying, like, what do we want? Our kids, we're going to be empty nesters in 5 years, which I can't quite wrap my head around. Both the boys will be in college. And so it's like, what do we really want? And I don't want, and so we were like, we don't like this. So let's do something else. We weren't ready to move to the West Coast. We had tossed around like California and Utah and Colorado. And we're like, okay, wait a minute. We don't have family out there. Let's stay on the East Coast, get the kids through school, and then we can decide what to do next.
Yeah, and I think that's it. You can reassess where you're at, and I think, a lot of the stuff you says rings so true to me because we're kindred spirits in that way. Like for me, let me be out in the country by myself. I don't want to be at the beach and be packed and I can't find a parking space. I know how it is because I live close to the beach. I mean, I don't live close to the beach here, but I go to the beach a lot, and just go for walks and things. And I'm thinking, man, I wouldn't want to live here. I just wouldn't. So some people love the city and the hustle bustle. It's like for me, like I would always make the joke with my coworkers. It's like, I used to wonder, I'd be driving in the middle of nowhere. I'm like, who in the heck would live out here by themselves with no one around? And I'm like, the longer I'm in medicine, I get it.
Yeah.
Sometimes you want to have this solitude and this, like, I don't want to deal with people at some point. It's hard because I am a people person, but I'm an introvert too, believe it or not. I'm not the life of the party. I don't go up and introduce myself to everyone generally, but I enjoy one-on-one conversation. I enjoy this. I enjoy these kind of things to see what's important in life. And when I hear your story, I think that because we're kindred spirits, because I'm the only guy in my house, right?
Yeah.
So I can identify. I have 2 Labradoodles too,
Yeah.
both female, my 2 daughters and my wife. So I'm gonna be, and the girls usually pull for me, but it's just amazing how that these times define us. And I think if you want to know someone's character, watch them go through a struggle in life. Then you're going to see where their foundation is, and where their strength is. And I think when we go through this stuff, those of us who have a good foundation, we want to share that with people and say, hey, look, there's hope. There's always hope. If you're breathing, there's hope. You could be in the hospital bed near death, and there's hope. We can, a miracle can happen. But also being able to, and I think a lot of people are at that point reassessing relationships, friendships, career paths. Ian Kramer, who I was on his podcast, it's funny, he's a vegan guy, and I was like, I don't want to go on this guy's podcast and argue about nutrition. And we had a fantastic, great conversation. He's a Dave Feldman type person, if you know what I'm saying. Just
Yes, I love
decent
Dave.
and kind, and so we had a great but it's about life, and he reassessed his life and goes, look, I've got to make some changes, and I respect that. So I think there's people that we may not agree on everything, but there's a lot that can connect us. As a doc and as a nurse practitioner, that you have a patient and you're like, how do I connect with this person? Oh, you're a whatever fan, so am I. Oh, you went to this school, so did I. So you could disagree on a lot of stuff, but I think when we find what unites us and what's important, because the way I've looked at this whole thing with the election and social media and everyone battling, I'm thinking, okay, if we're on the Titanic and it's sinking, we should probably help people and be nice to them. We're all in the same boat. We're going down together, or we're going to survive together. So, fighting while this thing's, and I think, when we're out of control, I think when we lose control like you did, especially because I'm not a type A like you, but I know exactly people type A. They don't want to give up anything. They want to do everything themselves, and they make themselves crazy. So luckily I'm not like that. But, I think at some point when you relinquish, when I have people that work with me, I trust them with my life, right? So it's like, I feel good. I've had people that I didn't trust. I'm like, I had to do everything, and I was stressed out because I had to do everything. But when you realize, hey, these good people, they're taking care of the patient. They're doing what we need to do. It doesn't have to be me, because the ego's got to drop at some point. It doesn't have to be you doing all that stuff. The practice I left, those patients are surviving just fine without me, and they'll say, what was that doctor's name that used to take care of me, like that I dedicated years to, right? I mean, that happens to me all the time. You get a new patient, they were with the doctor for 10 years. I'll say, who's your old doc? I don't know. He's kind of a tall guy, and they don't even know the doctor's name, right? Because they had no relationship. And I go, that's sad. My patients now, we have a relationship. Like, I know them. I know when they're going through struggles. I know when they're tense. I know, so those are things that are so valuable, and that's what we lost.
Yeah.
We've lost that. We've lost that human connection.
And I think just having compassion and being empathetic, I'm constantly reminded of that. I mean, I feel like 2020 was really about identifying populations at risk and people that, for a variety of reasons didn't have a focus or didn't have emphasis on, what was lacking in their lives. And on so many levels, like it's just part of, I think, for anyone that works in a service to others kind of industry, you are very heart directed and heart focused. And so for me, I got to a point where I just couldn't watch the news anymore. And I kept saying to my kids, you don't understand, like, I was the person who got the Washington Post every morning from, probably the age of 17 until I was 30. And I would read the Washington Post every single day. It's just one example. And my kids laugh because they can't believe I used to get a physical newspaper, which is a whole separate issue. But I think that, we as a society, we need to be helpers. We need to be looking out for one another. We need to be less divisive and, make an effort to connect. Much to your point, I used to always say, like, I would have docs that would say, how did you get the patient to tell you this? Because they would read our, on our records. And I was like, I just listened. And so much, we need to talk less and listen more. And that includes on social media, because we're so kind of amped up when we get on social media. If someone's been nasty in a thread on Twitter, or there's some nasty comment on Instagram or Facebook or wherever, YouTube, wherever people hang out. Clubhouse is the new place. But I think that we just need to take these opportunities to connect with one another and to try to be a little bit more understanding, a little bit more patient. There was someone who slid into my DMs on Twitter, and I honestly didn't understand what they needed from me. And so I was trying to be helpful, send them a resource, direct them somewhere, read this person's book, listen to this podcast, etc. And it came down to this person said, I just knew that I took a chance that you might not respond. And it was a woman, and she was very reasonable and wasn't inappropriate or rude. And I just said, for as long as I can, I want to be able to, respond to messages personally, and to make sure it's me in the thread, and make sure that I'm the one that's thinking thoughtfully and constructively, because it's very easy when we're busy during our day. We jump on Twitter and we're like, oh, let me see how many notifications, let me see what's going on. And then you just quickly start responding without realizing maybe there was 5 other discussions above your response that someone responded to, and it might have been in a completely different direction. So as I say, listen more, talk less. So it's like, take the time to like think thoughtfully. Like if I can't thoughtfully respond to something, I just won't respond. Like I used to just always feel like compelled, and that's the type A. And now I'm just like, let it be. You can respond later. It's not going anywhere. Nothing's gonna go on fire. It's a dumpster fire on Twitter. That's every day, all day, every day. There's a dumpster fire somewhere on Twitter. It's not anything that's new.
And that just shows my, I'll be typing a tweet and I start laughing to myself. My wife's like, "What are you laughing about? Let me see it." And she goes, "Don't send that one." I'm like, "Okay, dang it. It's funny though. It's really funny. People won't get it, Brian. They won't get it. It's funny because, I've said stuff joking and people think I'm serious because that's just my personality. I kind of like, I like to make light. I've been in some crazy situations where you sometimes have to just make light of it and go, okay, look, we disagree. It's okay.
Yeah,
But I think part of it is putting yourself in someone else's shoes. I have African-American friends and they go, "Brian, look, dude, your worldview is different than mine." My Persian friend, I have a friend who lives in Dubai. He's from Iran. He goes, "Brian, you don't understand the Middle East, man. Let me explain it to you." So I'm going to argue with him about something I have no clue about. Go, let me
right.
teach you how it is, right? So I think a lot of us have to be more humble and learn. I've learned so much. Like when I first heard about Jason Fung, I go, "This guy's a nutcase, right? He's nuts. There's no way." And I started listening. I go, "Let me just see what he's talking about." So I think if you open your mind and listen, and the thing that's really troubled me in medicine is I have a fair amount of patients that have they're at an HMO here that has full coverage. And I have like 50 patients of theirs. They come to me, they pay me cash to see me. And why? Because the doctor never talks to them and they're getting sicker and they know it and they're just inundated with medicines. But I get that patient, we get them off meds, we get them dialed in, we get their diabetes under control, they lose weight, everything gets better. They go back and see their doctor and the doctor never says, "Oh my gosh, you lost 42 pounds. Your blood pressure, everything's good. What happened?" They don't ask. She goes, they don't ask me. They just go, "Okay," because
It's a
in the
fact.
doctor's defense, they have 50 patients that day and they don't care. They don't have time to talk about it. And they don't want to get into it because they don't have time. This fat, crazy low carb diet is going to go away anyways. So I think that's part of it is that when we are so, and this is a lesson for society, I think, when we are so constantly distracted, constantly busy, constantly, we lose track of what matters. So you
Yeah.
go for a walk with your dogs. I love to go for a hike with my dogs and I learn stuff and I observe them and I have fun and I see the birds go by and you hear the breeze and those kind of things. Like, man, how come people don't do this, right? Just to shut down for a few minutes, just
Well,
to get out there.
I think that is the gift of 2020, that for me started. I mean, I'm always active. I'm never not motivated to be physically active, but the walking in nature thing, I really made a concerted efforts. And, I was watching all these memes of dogs that were on top of cabinets saying, "Please don't take me out for another walk," because
Yeah.
people felt like they couldn't do anything else other than walk outside with their pets. And so, or just get outside and walk in nature. And now it's just become a part of something I do every day. Like, once, in our area when we could start, going back to gyms, my husband and I take a solid core class together every Saturday morning. As much as I don't want to get up really early on my Saturday morning, I go and we do this class and get my butt kicked. And then we come home and walk the dogs for probably 4 miles. And then we kind of start our Saturday, and it's just become this really nice ritual. And, when we can't go to movies and we can't, travel like we did before and can't go to big sporting events, you just have to find other things to occupy your time. I think about my grandmother. I'm sure our grandparents are the same generation. And she used to talk to me about how she was just so humored that people would say they were bored. She was like, "Heck, I can always give you something to do. My kids know better than to ever tell me they're bored. Like, there is no boredom in my house. I'll give you a job. It'll probably involve cleaning a toilet somewhere, because with teenage boys, there's a lot of cleaning of toilets and they know how to clean toilets. But, just kind of taking those opportunities to, read, educate yourself, learn something new. There's someone on Twitter I think of in particular, Ty Romper, who's someone who takes what he learns and applies it, and he just kind of flies. And I always say, like, you can read all the books, but if you don't apply what you're learning in said books, then, what are you doing? So I'm so grateful that, there are Jason Fungs in the world, because he changed my life. I remember when I read his Complete Guide to Fasting book, and that changed everything. It was January 5 years ago. Changed everything.
Yeah, and you're in that list. Like you and Ty, if that you guys are speed bumps for me. I stop and I look, what does she say? Because I get
Aw.
something from you all. I do, really. You and him and certain people. There's other people I fast forward through. I'm like, I don't want to see what they have to say because I know it's going to be negative. I know that. So why are you on my feed? I don't want to see that. So I stopped following a lot of people that
Me too.
are scientists and they're well known, but it's like, you know what? I really don't. You and I are the same. Like, do I want to have a huge name on people? No, I want someone with a story and who
Yeah.
cares. And the reason I wanted you on is behind the scenes, you are the real deal, right? Like Jason Fung is the real deal. There's people who, and he's busier than anyone on earth. But part of it's like you say, hey Brian, do you want me to connect you with Zuby? I'm interviewing him today because of you. Really, I wouldn't be talking to him if it weren't for you, because I wouldn't have reached out to him. And saying, hey, how about this? And so you realize, look, we're all in the same boat. There's people who are gonna like your podcast. I hope they listen to both, right? Or all three of our podcasts now. And so I think we all have a value. And I think if we're competing and fighting, and so people would say, Brian, why do you talk nice about all these other podcasts and you promote them? I go, because they're good. It's good. I get something from it. I want my patients to listen to people who know what they're talking about and are decent people. But behind the scenes, you reach out and go, hey Brian, let me talk to you about this CGM. And so people don't know that, but I know it, right? So who are the people that are saying, hey, look, let's work together and let's make this a better healthcare. Let's help me help your patients and you help me. It goes back and forth. So that's what I love about you, and I see your sincerity. And so I'm happy that you're doing your groups, and I got to join one. That was cool. But you're helping people, and you're figuring it out how to help the most people you can with what you have, and not sacrifice your entire life as a result, and figure out how to have that balance. And I'm still working on that, trying to find the balance. But I respect that a lot. That's why I wanted to have you on, because I see you're a decent, kind, good person who wants to help people. That's what we need. We need more of this.
Thank you. No, and I think that mindset of abundance, like, I'm always happy to introduce people that I like to one another. I'm like, it'd be great synergy, like, to have you and Zuby connect. It's going to be an incredible interview without a doubt. And, from my perspective, it's so much about life is about true connections. It's like, when I thought about, Kara connecting you to talk about NutriSense, I was like, this is just an easy thing to do. For me, it's so effortless. And what does it take? Like 5 minutes. So the mindset of abundance, I'm not in competition with anyone. We're all doing great work. Why not, synergize and connect so that, we can magnify the value that we bring people. I think that's really critical and certainly super important. And like I said, too much divisiveness, too much noise. And I, much like you, I unfollow people. In fact, someone criticized me one day. They said, you only follow a couple hundred people. I was like, no, I follow like probably 230 people on Twitter, because I like to actually cultivate my feed. I really just enjoy, people that spread valuable information, that are anti-drama. I don't like drama. I loathe drama.
We don't need it. We have enough drama. We don't need to create more for ourselves. And I see people create their own drama. It's like, when are you going to stop self-destructing? Like, I have friends like, why are you self-destructing yourself? You don't need to do this. Just be nice to people. Don't fight with everyone, right? So one of my good friends, the same thing. He was fighting with 4 guys I know that are great guys. I'm like, do you know who the common denominator is in all these conflicts? You. All these other guys never have conflict. It's you. That's the problem. And he goes, I was so mad at you. And then I thought about it. He goes, he's right. I got to go apologize to these guys for being a jerk, right? So sometimes we need people in our lives that say, hey, maybe you got to look at this, So for you, what's life's best medicine? With all you've been through, all your stuff, like what gives you meaning? What gives you purpose? What gives you that sense of well-being in life?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's a combination of things. I mean, obviously family is everything. I'm part of a huge Italian family, and, even though we're all, across the United States, all disconnected, being part of that family unit, and recognizing that they love me for who I am. They love my entire nuclear family. I would say family first. And then it all starts with food. I mean, that's kind of like my standard refrain, that it all starts with food, whether it's when you eat your food or what kind of food you eat. It all starts with food. And then, just the connection, like knowing that I'm of service to others. To me, a podcast platform is such a really powerful way to share insights from experts in the health and wellness space. And so having the ability to do that, being physically active and traveling, I think those are, finding that balance of physically moving your body and being able to explore like new cultures and new things. Like we're trying to plan a trip to Europe for the summer, but I'll see if that actually comes to fruition. And then, having some degree of ramping yourself down, disconnecting from social media, reading a book, going to bed early, meditating, just, being truly grateful and expressing, like practicing gratitude. It's not just a noun, but a verb, practicing gratitude. I mean, those things to me are really is what's at the core of, medicine as I think of it, because medicine can be pharmaceuticals for when you need it, but medicine is also all the other stuff, the laughter, the connection, which makes me also realize as I'm saying this, I'm like, okay, I feel like this week has been particularly busy with the boys. So we're going to have to make sure we connect tonight when they're done with school and my work day is done.
Yeah, that's the important stuff. That will save you counseling fees and all that stuff down the road. It's an investment now, right? And I think more of us have to realize that. Excuse me. So it's like figuring out what's important and cultivating that, So I love what you're doing. You have my support 100%. And everyone go listen to her podcast, and we'll put links and connections and all that kind of stuff. I hope both of the people who listen to this podcast go to yours and listen.
No, it's going to grow. I mean, I really think it takes a bit of time to kind of like, kind of people to catch up. They may not know you're doing it. Plus, Low Carb MD is such a fantastic podcast that it'll be a natural kind of extension, because people will be curious to see another side of you and hear you interacting on a different level with, guests, and there'll be a natural curiosity.
Yeah, I think it's important. I think the value is like, let's get behind the curtain and see what kind of people we really are, and see what matters and what's important and what motivates you to do what you're doing. And that will motivate other people who are lost. And I think for me, it's like, look, let's be a light. Let's help people go in the right direction, and hopefully get life better. Even if what I want is someone who's sitting there, the reason we did Low Carb MD was for that 500-pound person who's sitting there thinking there's no hope, I cannot do this, and then saying, oh my gosh, this other guy did it and he was 650 pounds, right? And saying, look, this can be done. Can fasting be done? Can these things be done? Yes. And part of it's when we see an example, like for me, when you see it on Twitter, that's what I love, is someone goes, look, here was me a year ago and here's me now. And you're like, oh my goodness. Right. Yeah. So, but seeing that, not just physically, but spiritually, emotionally, and all those things. So the reason I started this podcast is it's not appropriate on Low Carb MD to start talking about faith and religion and all these things. I don't want people to be hostage. They go, I just want to hear low carb. I don't want to hear. So at least people can decide, I don't want to hear positive messages. I don't want to hear what Cynthia is doing with their life. I don't care. Right. But I think most people do. I think ultimately when people listen, they're like, oh my gosh, the best compliment is my 19-year-old. She goes, Dad, when are you going to put out more? I'm like, I have to pay for this myself. Either you want to have dinner or you want to listen to podcasts, but she goes, I love it. Our whole office is listening. I'm like, oh, that's so cool. That's cool that your own daughter's loving what you're seeing, right? What you're doing.
Well, so I think, I'm not surprised because it's your daughter, but I think it's also kind of peeling back the curtain for any of us. And I'm sure you're in the same group. You get interviewed on a lot of other podcasts, and they generally want to talk. There's usually one particular focus that they want you to talk about. So I think it's good for people to, peel back the curtain, like, what is it about your life that allows you to be, a success at what you do? And I think that's really relevant. And I say this from personal experience. I had a client tell me yesterday, I find your journey so interesting. And I was like, really? She was like, you should write a book on that. I was like, okay, I'll take that to heart. But the point being that I think it's really helpful for people to understand, like, we've all come from different backgrounds, and we've all, kind of gotten to a point where we acknowledge, like, these are the gifts that God gave me, and this is what I'm doing with said gifts, and sending a message of positivity in a time of our lifetimes like it is now is even more critically important. So I'm so glad that you decided to do this podcast.
Well, thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it. I love what you're doing. So, gosh, just go out and do that. Go for your nature walks. And, I'm out there listening to your podcast and go for a hike. And I think it's so awesome. What I love is I hear people say, one lady goes, every morning on the tractor, I'm listening to Low Carb MD, and now I'm hearing people say, you know what? As a matter of fact, I question doing this podcast financially, right? It's like not wise financially, put it that way. But I had a lady, two patients in a row. Well, just to tell you, it was Monday morning. I told my wife, here's how much the podcast costing to do. And I'm just kind of, telling her, she's like, Brian, if you're called to do it, do it. I don't care. We'll figure it out. It's not a big deal. And the next day, someone said, your podcast saved my life. And I'm like, yeah, Low Carb MD. It's like, no, Life's Best Medicine, this episode with Jimmy, or this episode with Tyler. Yeah, 2 days in a row, 2 people came in and said, oh my gosh, they were in tears going, I was hopeless. And that guy's message spoke to me, or that person, or that 500-pound person, or whatever. And that's the thing, is everyone's story, your story matters. Everyone listening, your story matters. So we can't all be Cynthia. I can't be Cynthia, but I can do what I can do with my God-given talents and my platform that I've been given. So get out there and be on your platform. Be out there and help your neighbors, help your friends, be kind. Like Cynthia, when I was thinking, when you were telling your story about when it was a family member or a friend that said, I'll be there. You need me, I'll be there. Because they know you're a person that says, no, I'm fine, don't worry. But when you need it, right? Your cousin. So it's like that. So she was there to comfort you and be with you and say, okay, I've seen this before. Here's what's going on. And when you have someone like that, like when I started doing my own business, people go, Brian, I know how to do marketing. I know how to do this. I know how to. And so I was like, okay, I don't have to worry. I don't have to know it all. I need to have good people around me. And so all of us, we have to surround ourselves with good people. So Cynthia, I'm surrounding myself with you and Tyler and all these good people, because together we can do great things and we can help people. So thanks again for joining me. I know you're a busy lady, and so get back to life. But everyone, this is gold. This is important stuff. This is, talking about being on your back, sick, and not knowing if you're going to survive, and then going out and changing the world for people, and I think one person at a time, we help who we can. And so it's always an honor. And, I woke up before my alarm clock this morning because I knew I got to interview you and spend time with you, because, it's like sitting down with a friend and just chit-chatting. So everyone, thanks for listening. Thanks for your support, and be blessed this week. Go out and be kind to yourself and be kind to others. And Cynthia, we'll talk soon.
Sounds good.
Thank you for listening to this episode. We greatly appreciate your support. We would greatly appreciate a positive thumbs up on all of the platforms like iTunes and Spotify, or wherever you're listening. And we just thank you for our Patreon supporters. We greatly appreciate your help in getting this message out. We think there's a lot of important information, and hopefully this helps you. Have a great day, and thank you for listening, and thank you for your support.